lovely friends, it's Margaret and it's time for another Writer Wednesday. So I've got my tea, I've got my notes, and today we are going to be talking about my personal writing process. So I'm starting out with a disclaimer. This is what works for me. This is what I have built. This is how I've found I tend to go about working through my book. Many writers will do this differently. This is not the one tried and true sure way to write a book. It's just how I get from start to finish. And I wanted to put this out here, number one, because I wanted to give you an idea of what I would be covering in my Messy Writers series. And number two, because the way that I have come up with my own personal system is by looking at the systems of others. I am a very big proponent of take what you need from writing advice and throw the rest away. I will try any kind of writing advice once, except for the whole get up at 5 a.m. thing because I am not physically built for that. So today we will be talking about how I get from the idea stage of a book all the way into the editing stage. So the first stage obviously is the idea stage. You don't have a book if you don't have an idea. Until that book is an idea in your mind, it does not exist in any way, shape, or form. You cannot write what you have not thought about. I have already talked about that in a previous video, so I will link that up top. But I do get my ideas from some weird places sometimes. Sometimes it's watching TV, sometimes it is while I'm asleep, and sometimes it's because an author burned me and I was really mad about the way the book ended, and so I decided I was going to rewrite it, but then it was a better idea. Okay, maybe it wasn't a better idea, but I like it better because no one's dead. I find that ideas usually come to me when I am not looking for them, usually when I am elbow deep in a current project and need something to distract me. They come to try and distract me and make it longer, but I don't let them most of the time. My ideas usually need a little bit of time to marinate. The one that I'm going to be going into in November has been marinating in my head and I've been playing around with it since I think early this year, like January, February. I'm not entirely sure on how time works this year though, so it could have been last year. Well, obviously, Rebel King, the book that I'm going into for NaNoWriMo, we've already covered this idea stage. I'm there, been there, done that. It is in my head. I've got so many ideas. I just have to figure out which ones are the best ideas, which we'll get to when we write, eventually. So stage 2 in my writing process, which is where I am, or where I'm about to go into with Rebel King, so I will be prepared for November, is the research stage. Now you gotta be careful with this stage because sometimes you start researching things and it's 6 months later and you haven't written a word. So just like, give yourself a timeline. You can always do research later as you're writing or after you're writing. Even though I write fantasy, even though my worlds are not Earth, they're not real people, there's really nothing tying them to anything in this reality except for me, myself, my brain, I still like to do research, and there are a couple of reasons that I do. Part of it is because I'm just a history nerd. I'm already gonna read those books anyways. I like learning things about history, especially for some odd reason if we're talking about medieval / Renaissance era Europe. Do I live in Europe? No. Do I care? Also no. Another part of doing research is looking up stereotypes. What we see in fiction does not occur in a vacuum. Also, research can be things like looking at other books that would be up next to it in lists online or on the shelves to try and figure out what are the standards of this genre or subgenre? What are some of the things the audience is going to expect? If you're writing a romance, they're going to expect a happy ever after typically, because that's what romances have. Like, if you don't have a happy ever after, it's not a romance. After we get through the research stage, it's time to go on to plotting, which is my favorite part because it uses my writing noggin but requires no actual work from me. I mean, it does require me to like write things down, but it doesn't require me to think too hard and make words on the page as much. It's so easy to plot. So if you've been on my channel, seen any of my writing videos, you know that I personally am a plotter. I start out knowing what point A and point Z are, and I like to sit down and figure out what everything else between is. Not everyone is like that. Some people are what's called a pantser. If they try and sit down and plot a book, it kills the joy of it for them. Like I said, I thrive off of plotting. Maybe sometimes I spend too much time plotting. This is probably where you have seen the most change and growth in my writing process because I just like plotting and I like finding out how other people do plotting, and I like finding ways to make plotting easier and also to control how much time I spend on it. So I started out as someone who was like making full on outlines for things. I mean, I had point 1 with A, the little Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, and then B, little Roman numerals. Like, I was that detailed. That kind of doesn't work for me anymore. It does, like, there's such a thing as overplotting, and I did do that with that story. And yeah. My most recent change is adding the beat sheet from Save the Cat Writes a Novel to my process. I love the beat sheet. I reread this book almost every time I start a new book because it just gets me thinking about the right questions. Before that, I used a lot of the stuff that you would read in A Book in a Month by Victoria Lynn Schmidt. Now, when I am plotting, I kind of start out with what I call free writing, and that's just basically me asking and answering a bunch of questions about the characters, about the plot, about what I think is going to happen. Free writing is something that I return to continually when I am stuck, or I should return to. Sometimes I ignore that option is there because I don't actually want to work. But when I'm stuck, it is very helpful to just sit and ask myself what's going on and just write down whatever comes into my mind without having to worry about, will this have repercussions in the story later? Free writing is wonderful. I highly suggest you do it. From that point, my process is to sit down and go through and to do the beat sheet for Save the Cat. I will figure out what genre that my book is based on the Save the Cat genres. That can help, especially since it gives you books and ideas to compare things to. You can sit back and like look up that particular part in the plot and you can see what other books have done previously. People are going to think that that sounds formulaic, but like writing is a formula. The 3-act structure is a formula, and it can be helpful because when you know the rules, you can figure out how to break them. I'm the world's weirdest Capricorn. From there, I typically kind of go into my character stuff using A Book in a Month. I started out using this years and years and years ago before I think even Save the Cat existed. I've been using it for probably 10 years at this point. I don't think I've ever actually completed it all the way through. I've definitely never tried to write a book. Well, I have tried to write a book in 30 days, but not using this system because I usually get about halfway through some of the character stuff and I'm like, oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm done. I don't need the rest of this. But this really does help me sit down and think about character and what's going to happen with the characters. And it has some really good questions about how do these plot points affect the characters. So I still like it. As you can tell, I kind of like having systems that I can use and adapt to my own personal needs. And after that, I take my plot points and put them on a poster board in a bunch of sticky notes that are color-coded to whoever's point of view that chapter is. Stage number 4 for me is drafting. This is my favorite stage of writing. I think I just said plotting is my favorite stage of writing, but like, if we're actually writing, drafting is my favorite stage of writing. I can sit down and put in like hundreds of words at a time of just rubbish when I'm not having to think about what I've done before and what's going next, and I like drafting. I will say, drafting a book has never taken me the same amount of time twice. It is very frustrating, and I'm highly annoyed by it. I do something that is called fast drafting. I just sit down and I try and get out as much of my book as I possibly can at one time, and I do not look back at what I have previously written. I learned that at like 16 or 17 because I realized that I was starting a whole bunch of chapter 1s for projects, editing that continuously, and then not finishing the book. And so I finally was like, you know what, Margaret? You're not allowed to start any more books until you have sat down and finished one book. And that, my friends, was my first kind of sort of novel. It's more a novella length, but I finished the dang thing. That's what counts. Hand wrote that entire dang thing, too. I mean, I like the aesthetic and I like the feel of handwriting, but oh my gosh, it takes so much less time to do it on a computer. I personally use Google Docs because I have a Chromebook and they're the worst. That's basically my only option. I would love to use things like Word again or Scrivener. I would love to learn how to use Scrivener, but can I? No. I did use Noveler at one point and they were pretty good, but I wasn't willing to pay the price for Noveler when I had Google Docs, and I could just use that regardless of the fact that it's slow and takes forever to load when your draft gets to a certain size. Speaking of which, if you are using Google Docs, I highly recommend having each chapter separately because it is so much easier to work on chapter by chapter and then post them in a main master draft than it is to have to wait for the entire thing to load, which can take several minutes. And then it's slow when you're scrolling, and Have I mentioned that I don't like Chromebooks? Pretty straightforward step. You sit down, you write. I don't look back. If I make changes in the plot while I am writing, I put a pin in that. I make a note, go back, change it so that this thing, and I'll write down what the thing was, happened in this part or from the beginning, and then I'll continue on as if that thing has happened. I know a lot of people will want to go back to the beginning, but for me, that just typically I don't do that because it doesn't work. I know that not everyone does this way. I know there are writers out there that like to kind of edit as they go, and they're able to control that and actually make progress. I just prefer to just go all at once and not have to worry about editing because it is the bane of my existence. Our stage number 5 for me when it comes to writing a book and getting it ready to send out to querying is editing. My least favorite step on this journey because it makes my brain hurt. I don't like it. Editing is an endless cycle of torture and pain and realizing what you wrote is not as good as it felt when you wrote it. I'm giving editing a bad rap. It's not actually that bad, especially when you run across a phrase or a paragraph where you're like, oh, I actually knew what I was doing. I'm impressed with myself. Instant endorphin rush there. Editing takes me longer than actually sitting down and drafting usually does, and I think that's what frustrates me the most is because I have to sit down and I can't just go through it. I have to actually think about things and fix things and keep track of things and cry. I usually like to get at least one edit that is just me before I'm sending it out to other people to read because I'd at least like there to be fewer typos than there are when I am fast drafting because my fingers get mixed up and they don't always spell words right and sometimes they forget entire second halves of sentences and I have to figure out what I was saying the first time. It's not fun. What is fun is kind of seeing it all come together. As much as I complain about editing, I do really like having that moment where things start to click and I'm starting to see where all of the pieces go, and you don't usually get that until you've read through the draft at one time and sat down to edit and make changes. So I guess editing is not terrible. So that is as far as I can take you in my writing process because that is as far as I have successfully gotten in my writing process. And if someone out there wants to represent me, I can definitely start making videos giving advice about querying and stuff, but I feel like I should probably successfully query and get a book sold, not sold, but repped by an agent before I start making videos about that. So, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, if you enjoyed this video, there will be other videos over here that you might like as well. Go ahead and check them out. That is it for now, my friends. Happy writing, and I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye!